Hello everyone, Kenty Tiger here with Bengali Engineering in Play. We are back in Space Engineers and I wanted to do this, I'm going to go ahead and call this a basic survival tutorial. The reason I call it that is that, well, you kind of have to start somewhere. So for all of you folks who are just getting tuned into Space Engineers, um, this is probably one of the tutorials for you. What do you need to start out with? And I've done a couple videos about this interspersed with the bazillion other videos on my webpage there. Um, but the first thing I think, which is absolutely critical, is power. Obviously, when your suit runs out of power, let me go ahead and tab over so you can actually see the keys here that are responsible for different things. When your suit runs out of power, you're pretty much doomed. You can't grind, you can't weld, you can't really do anything. And at that point, if you don't have some place where you can recharge, which is to say a cockpit or a medical station, you're done. Your game is over. And I know that sounds a bit defeatist, but that is the truism that you really have to deal with in Space Engineer survival. Um, Number two, you need oxygen and hydrogen. Now, for this particular tutorial here, we are in space. Now, you may not necessarily end up in space. You may end up on a planet or something like that, and the dynamics are a bit different. Um, if you're on a planet, you inherently have resources that are available to you. If you're on an Earth-like planet, then you open your mask and now you have an infinite amount of oxygen. So no doom and demise there. You may still have a problem with hydrogen, however. Another advantage to being on a planet somewhere is a source of ice. So having some ice is always a good thing, because then ultimately with an oxygen generator, you have a source of oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen obviously for you, because we are oxygen breathing creatures. So without oxygen, well, I'll let you fill in the blank. Hydrogen obviously is for propulsion, so your suit does use hydrogen for propulsion. When you run out of hydrogen, obviously you cannot move anymore, which is kind of a drag when you're in space, because you're just kind of stuck there now. So this tutorial is kind of to get you tuned in on the very basic things that you need. Now, can you start off in a totally blank world and actually survive? My answer to that is no. The reason for that is ultimately A, you need power, B, you need oxygen, hydrogen. Okay, oxygen for your living purposes, and hydrogen so you're mobile. If you run out of either of those, you're doomed in one way or the other. So if you start out in the world with just what you spawned with, then you do not have enough to do what you need to do to survive. You need a medical station, because you have to be able to repower yourself, get oxygen, get hydrogen. Medical station is a great place to do that, because it actually does all three for you. The caveat to that is that the medical station needs power. It needs a source of power so it can give you power. So if you do not have a medical station or access to a medical station, you cannot survive. Hate to say that, again, defeatist kind of an attitude, defeatist statement, but true. In Space Engineers, if you do not have that, you cannot survive. You have to have power. Everything runs on power in one way or the other. Your tools run on power, except for your rifle. But obviously, if you can't move, you're still doomed there. If you're truly starting out in a world, which this is a blank world, there is nothing here but you, the sun, a lot of space, and asteroids. So what I did was put together this basic, I call this the basic survival satellite. I'm going to put this up on the web space website, the workshop, Steam workshop, for me. because I think it's a useful tool. It's something that you can play with, but it's also something that you can experiment with and move around. So let's go ahead and get into what it is here. So I've said the first two things that you need are gases, or really power and gases. Those are the really absolute most important thing. If you don't have those, you will not survive. Period. There's just no way around that. So what do we have here? We have a satellite. Obviously, we're out in space. Big rock over here. Let me go ahead and we're going to talk about two things, and let me go ahead and bring those things onto the screen so we can talk about them. So I'm bringing Chrome over here, and you're not going to be able to see that. So let me zoom the other way. So I've got two windows up here. So let's talk about the medical room first. So medical room again. As you see, overview here, medical room is a block available for large ships and stations. You can't put this on a small ship. Now, there are mods out there that does put a medical room, or at least medical room functionality, onto small ships. What can you do with a medical room? Change character appearance. Okay, yippee-yahoo, but that's not really a survival thing. Restore character hit points. What does that really mean? Well, you can heal yourself. Okay, so when you take some sort of damage, we call it hit points. Carry over from RPGs and that sort of thing. So you can heal yourself. That's, hey, medical room. Imagine that. But here's the three important things. Recharge suit energy, we talked about. That is your absolute most important resource that you have, is power, energy. You have to have that. All of your tools run on it. While previous versions, you run out of energy and you actually start to take damage and die. There was a lot of people who were mixed emotions on that. They thought that was a little bit unrealistic, and I'm not sure it is, because after all, if your suit runs out of power, there's a lot of life support aspects there that we may not actually consider. But space can be very cold. If you are in direct sunlight, it can be very hot. Okay, there is no insulation between you and space. So your suit becomes an environmental aspect of the universe. It's either protecting you from heat, protecting you from cold, and of course the fact that you're actually working in a vacuum, mostly a vacuum. Those aspects really aren't built into the game because they are a bit deep, complicated, however you want to look at that. But so suit energy, whether it's realistic or not, your suit does need energy. It no longer completely protects you. You can actually run out of energy and not really anything happens, other than you can't use your tools anymore. So I don't think that's quite realistic anymore, but anyway. Restock jetpack fuel, hydrogen. Restock oxygen supply, oxygen. Okay, so this is what the medical room does for you. As far as components go, you need interior plate to start the making of this. Then you need medical components, 15, and I don't know if this is entirely accurate, because this is, after all, off the Space Engineers wiki, and things change. They don't always get these updated. Medical components 15, display 10, large steel tube 5, small steel tube 20, metal grid 60, construction components 80, interior plate 220. So you need 240 interior plate if you add these two up. This is the start. Okay, how much does this weigh? This only comes into play when you're building onto a ship, because obviously you need to move it around. Build time, that is relative to a 0 on your welding and grinding, or really welding. Idle power consumption, we'll get to that. So obviously this thing takes power. 2 by 2 by 1. So it's 1 high and 2 by 2 grid. Okay, so knowing those sorts of things, it is not airtight. That does come into play if you're trying to build this into something. Um, respawn point, which is important if you die. So this does give you a respawn point. Here's what it looks like. And while I'm here, spawning mechanics, the medical room must be powered. I'm just going to read right off the page here. A medical room uses a constant 2 kilowatts. Now that's not actually true. It uses up to 2 kilowatts to do what it does. Nope, I guess it does even in idle. So, okay. 2 kilowatts. 2 kilowatts it is. Which I guess it doesn't use any more than that. So I was reading up here and not translating megawatts to kilowatts. So it needs constant 2 kilowatts. 2 kilowatts is quite a bit. If you consider what the medical room does, probably not quite a bit. Pretty reasonable, I think. So, anyway, go over to the other aspect here, which a medical room by itself can provide you power. But if you're connected into your conveyor grid, then it can actually supply you with oxygen and hydrogen. But it has to be connected into your grid. It can't do that on its own. You can't put ice into it and have it do anything. So for the purpose of oxygen and hydrogen, we need an oxygen generator, or what they call it now, the H2O2 generator, which is more accurate. I've always thought calling an oxygen generator when it can only generate oxygen is fine, but once they shift it over and it could provide oxygen and hydrogen, it's no longer an oxygen generator, it's a gas generator. So that was my argument. So now it does indeed do that. Now, an oxygen generator can fill bottles, as you can read here for yourself on the screen usage. So it can refill the bottles, or it can provide the oxygen and hydrogen to the medical bay so it can refill your suit for you. So those are the two aspects. You can carry the oxygen tanks and hydrogen tanks, which will then automatically replenish your supplies in your suit as long as you're carrying them. So having oxygen bottles, having hydrogen bottles is absolutely critical to your survival, but not to the point of disaster. Obviously, you can survive without a hydrogen tank, without an oxygen tank, as long as you have access to that medical storage or medical bay where you can recharge those things. Having the oxygen tanks and hydrogen tanks, or the bottles rather, will give you a ready source. Now, the downside to the oxygen and hydrogen bottles is they do take up inventory space in your suit. So that is one of the downsides. Okay, so let's talk about power here. Active power consumption, when it is operating, as in it is changing ice into gases, it's going to use basically a third of a megawatt. What does that mean in terms of kilowatts? 333 kilowatts. Okay, 333 kilowatts is quite a bit. Is that realistic? I could argue no, it's not. There are hydrogen generators, which basically are an electrolysis unit. This thing is an electrolysis unit. That's the bottom line. You're taking ice. Ultimately, you're warming it up to turn it into water. Water then goes into an electrolysis chamber using electricity to generate, or rather break down the molecular bonds to turn it into gaseous oxygen, gaseous hydrogen from water. So ice to water to gases. We do that through the simple process of electrolysis that's been around for centuries. We've known about this. There are hydrogen electrolysis units that focus on the hydrogen, and they take it, compress it, bottle it, and use it for hydrogen cars. and this is the size of a small refrigerator. You plug it into an outlet exactly as you would a small refrigerator. It runs on a 15 amp circuit. Can we run 333 kilowatts on a 15 amp circuit? Answer, no, not even close. Okay, so is this a realistic number? I don't think so, but hey, I'm not a space engineer's designer. I'm just an engineer. What do I know? So, anyway, we need power. Okay, in this case, for active, we need 333 kilowatts. If we remember from our our medical station, we need 2 kilowatts. So we need 335 kilowatts really to survive. Okay, so that was my basic number, which is why I went into solar panels. And I really should have brought up solar panels. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that. Space Engineers solar panel. And let's see if we can find the Space Engineers wiki for solar panels, which is right there. So we'll go over here and have a look-see at this. Okay, solar panels. What is it? Well, hey, a solar panel is a solar panel. What does it do? Maximum output power in megawatts, 12.12, which is 120 kilowatts. Okay, so 120 kilowatts per panel. Now, what do we need? Very light on the components, except for solar cells. Solar cells will kick your ass every time. So, not a whole lot. Construction components is the primary component that you need to build this. Then we have 7 more. So we need 10 construction components. We need 1 large steel tube. We need 4 steel plates, 2 computers, not sure why, and 64 solar cells. Makes sense. Solar cells in a solar panel. Magic. So, requirements. 120 kilowatts. Now, that's maximum. That's if it's directly facing the sun and you have all 4 green indicators there, then you will be producing approximately 120 kilowatts. Okay, so having shown you all of those, let me get this back off the screen. And back to the world here of Space Engineers. So, what do we have here? Going from top to bottom, we have an antenna. You're going to need an antenna for the reason of, well, we kind of want to find this. So this becomes your beacon. There's the reason I use an antenna over the beacon. An antenna is much more energy consumptive. So depending on how many, you can use up to 200 kilowatts here. If you're broadcasting at the full 50 kilometer range of an antenna. The reason I like antennas is your antennas are a broadcast entity, meaning that information about something can be broadcast. And I won't get into that in detail here. A beacon, while much more efficient on energy use, is limited to being a beacon. That's all it can do. Say, here I am. That's all it does. You cannot transmit information across it. You can't use it for anything but a beacon. So it's convenient, but not necessarily an effective tool when you want to do other things with it, which is why I put an antenna on this. So right now the antenna is set at 5,000, so 5 kilometers, which should be plenty enough for right now. Kind of hard to see here, but we have a medical room that is sitting right here under the antenna. So this is the stick form of a medical room. Why do we need a medical room? I think I've beat that one into the ground. What's the next thing here? This is an oxygen generator. Okay, sitting right under here. So we have the the medical room and the oxygen generator bolted on right underneath the medical room. And we have 2 other fairly critical things, not necessarily absolute necessities for survival from the perspective of, oh my god, I'm dead. But very, very important nonetheless, is a container. This happens to be a small container, and a battery. Okay, so the battery here, and battery is a battery, so it is very resource intensive, but we want to have some place where we can store some excess energy. The other thing you see here is 4 solar panels. Why did I choose 4 solar panels instead of 6 or 8 or 10 or 15 or 1? The reason for that is we went through, we calculated the power consumption now, talking about pure power consumption, not idle. Medical room was 2K. Oxygen generator, when it's running, is 333K. So I need 335K kilowatts of electricity just to run those 2 devices. Okay, so I showed you the solar panels directly facing the sun. Let me rotate around here so you can see where the sun is. There it is. Okay, so the sun is directly facing these guys. So theoretically, if and when we build these, we should be able to have 4 bars, 4 green, which means we would be producing the maximum capability of 120. 120 times 4, for those of you who are math deficient, is 480. So we should be able to develop 480 kilowatts of electricity with these 4 panels, which means we are developing more electricity. We have more electricity available than we actually need by a slight margin. Not very much, 100 kW, give or take, and we will actually consume a lot of that with our antenna when it goes active, and also our battery when it's charging. Our battery is going to consume everything it can while it's charging. All right, so that is the basic satellite. Now, of course, most of you that have been looking here know that I'm lying, so let's go to this side. I have a box back here. Why did I put a box back here? So this is a small cargo container. It is a complete small cargo container, and the reason for that is this is about survival. If you walk into this world with absolutely nothing but your suit and you're doomed, because you have no way to build anything. Okay, you're going to run out of power eventually, but even if you didn't run out of power, you have to have components to build something. So what I did here was kind of the didn't want to do this, but don't really have a way around it. Is a completed box, so you really don't have to have any components to build this. It's there. And what's in here? A bunch of components. You see I have a bunch of components in here because I dismantle everything I could find. So we have these things. Now, why do I have these things here? Well, you see construction components, we have interior plates, we have steel plates, more steel plates than we need, in fact. Small steel tubes, motors, metal grids, large steel pipes. We have displays, computers, medical components, imagine that. Solar cells, power cells, radio communications equipment, and bulletproof glass. Now, why do I have all these things? So my thought process here on this is we have a medical room, so we need components to build that medical room. They're here. We have an oxygen generator, or a gas generator rather, so we have the components for that. We have 4 solar panels, so we have components for that. We have a small cargo container besides the one that's done here, so we have components for that. We also have a battery, so we have components for that. So if we look at all of these things, we have components for those. Now, I mentioned we had some extras. Why do we have extras? One of the things I always like to do, let me get back around to the front side here and kind of show you what I had intended. One of the things I like to do is put a, so this is not going to be on the one that you happen to build, the one that's out there on the Steam Workshop. But what I want to do is build a conveyor tube. Let me see what happens here when I do that. Oh, I thought, yeah, my Space Master mode here is turned on. So what I wanted to do is be able to build on. So this is a curved conveyor. elbow conveyor. Control 8, which goes over to, and again, this is my preference. So yes, you can go to the medical room, all fine and dandy. Or you can jump into a cockpit, just sit there for a minute. You don't have to press any keys, you don't have to do anything. You just sit there and it will replenish your oxygen supply, your hydrogen supply, and your power.
Energy low.
So, hey, energy low. So I like to build onto my survival builds, whatever they happen to be, a cockpit. So the two additional items that that have materials, components in that box is a conveyor, a curved conveyor, and the cockpit. So those are the two additional things. And again, everybody has their preference, which is why I didn't actually put it on the build. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to grab all of these components here. And most of you will not be able to do this. Obviously, your volume in liters here is 24,000. I'm running a Kenti block suit mod, so that's part of my Kenti blocks mods that actually puts a lot of space in your suit. And the reason I did that, this is for me. I like immersion. I like just focusing on what I'm doing, and the downside with 1200 liters, which is what your typical 3x suit volume, suit capacity is, I go to my cargo container, I pick up a very few items, I go and weld a little bit, I run out, I go back to the cargo container, pick up more, weld a little bit, go back and forth. While there is some realism there, I don't deny that, it really does detract from when I'm building, and this is just the OCD engineer. When I'm building, I want to build. So I want to pick up all the shit, I want to go weld, I want to finish this block, I want to come back, get some more stuff, finish this block, and then move on to the next block, go get the materials for that. So I like having those materials. So that's why I did this. This is, again, for me. This is for my immersion. So we should be able to, given the volume here versus the volume here, I should be able to pick up all these, which I think it's going to let me do. Alright, so again, to review here, what all of these components here, I've got 4 solar panels, I have a medical station, I have an antenna, I have an oxygen generator, I have enough for my curved conveyor, and obviously we see bulletproof glass there, which is for the cockpit. Okay, so those are my things. Those are what I like to build on my absolute survival station. Okay, so I pulled all that out of there. So let's start building. So over here on number 1, I have a welder. I happen to have an elite welder, which is kind of a neat thing. It lets me weld a little faster. So let's go ahead and weld up this this medical room. All right, and to test to see whether this medical room actually works, and the answer should be no, but let's go ahead and test. Okay, so one of the things you notice is this medical room does not have any power. It is completed, but it does not have any power. One of the interesting things about the medical rooms is they don't have a red indicator to tell you if they don't work. So it looks like, based on the computer screen here, it has power, but it doesn't. So what are we going to do first? Well, we said that power was absolutely critical, so let's go ahead and finish the solar panel here. Okay, we see that's a 1, then it's a 2, then it's a 3, and then it's a 4. So we know this is producing as much power as it is capable of producing. So let's retest here and see what happens. We're going to press the T key. And you notice my power is now going up. But you notice that my oxygen and hydrogen are remaining the same. They are not moving at all because we do not yet have a source of that. So we're going to go back up to 100% here. Alright, so with one solar panel and one medical bay, we know that we can replenish our energy supply indefinitely. Okay, so no storage of power. We just have enough power to make ourselves work. So these other three panels then become a functional necessity by way of we need that power for our oxygen generator. So we'll go ahead and weld those up, and then we're going to go ahead and weld this oxygen generator up. There it is. So what does yellow mean? Okay, so red means I'm turned off, I'm disabled in some way, or I don't have any power. Yellow means I have power, I just don't have any damn ice. Green means I'm powered, I have ice, but I'm not needing to use ice for anything, so I'm just sitting idle. And when it turns to that cayenne color, that aqua bluish color, it means it's actually got ice, it's powered, and it's producing gases. So that's pretty important stuff. All right. Down here, this is a small cargo container, as we can see on the screen there. So let's go ahead and weld that up. Boom, done. And finally, the battery. Why is the battery important? Because the battery gives us a way to store that excess energy, whatever it happens to be. So let's go ahead and I'm going to do a K on this so you can actually see what's going on with the battery. Current input is 474 kilowatts. Now we said the total capacity of my solar is 480, right? So obviously the battery is consuming as much power as it possibly can. Now, interesting thing about the batteries, and we'll go ahead and do that because after all this is a survival thing, so you need to consider some of these things. Semi-auto turns your battery into either a generator or a consumer, depending on where it is in the cycle. So when you first set semi-auto, it typically goes into a discharge mode, which means it outputs power as needed. Obviously you're not going to put more power onto the grid than is consumed, so you're only going to put the amount of power out onto the grid as is being consumed. In this case we're consuming 3 kilowatts of energy, right? So we know 2 of that is going to the medical station. Probably the 1 is going to the oxygen generator because it's completely idle. It does not have any ice in it. So that's my 2 and my 1. So if we were to go semi-auto, we're going to see it click over to a discharge mode. We're only putting out power. We are not putting in power. What happens is the power that's in it, so right now we have a quarter of a charge. Okay. So we have this much power. We have, 312 kilowatt hours of stored power versus our maximum stored, which is 1 meg. So we have almost a third of a kilowatt stored kilowatt hour. So discharge. When we go into semi-auto discharge, it's going to discharge all the way to 0, then go to recharge mode, which means we're going to only take in power. We're not going to output power at all. And that's it. So we discharge until we're at 0, we recharge until we're at 100%, and re-enter into a discharge mode. So an endless cycle of 100% to 0 to 100% to 0 to 100% to 0, blah, 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 blah. The reason why I leave all of these boxes unchecked is because I like to see my batteries go up to 100% and then stay there until I need them for something. Okay, so my concept here is that right now solar power is my primary power source. and it's going to remain my primary power source um, until something else consumes all that power. So right now, the only thing that's using power, in fact, is the battery. It's charging, but it is also outputting power. So it is my primary power source as well as my primary power user. So this ends up being incredibly flexible. It takes all the power that you have on your grid, stores it, but is also powering everything at the same time. And these are going to be scalars. So if this goes up, for example, if we put ice in the oxygen or the gas generator, then this is going to drop, but this is going to go up to that 335, right? So between the 2 and the 333, so this is going to go to the max power, and then this is going to drop down to about 100 kilowatts, which is just going into the battery. So we still are storing some energy, but we're actually outputting more energy than we're storing. So that's why I always leave those blank. So the batteries become very, very flexible. They always maintain that 100%. They shift from 100% to drawing a little bit, then recharge again, draw a little bit, recharge again. So they're constantly cycling to keep that 100%. That way, when you lose your reactor, you accidentally forget to put uranium in your reactor, you lose it, then your batteries are already at 100%. They're not at 2% when your reactor runs out, because. So, all right. So, what else do we need? Well, this is the me stuff, so I want to build this this curved conveyor. So I'll go ahead and do that. Why is the curved conveyor red? Because it's connected here, because it's not connected here. So let's go ahead and build this as well. All right. Now, why do I like the cockpits? Well, here's why, and we're going to half demonstrate for you. I talked about energy before, so I'm going to use T. I'm configured for T to go in there, so I'm staring at the sun. Wow. And you notice I went back up to 100% energy. So it consumes, it provides you with suit resources just by sitting in it. Now, normally a cockpit obviously is going to be attached to some sort of ship. But that's why I use cockpits, because while you're sitting in there, you may be controlling something, but you're also recharging your suit material. So the cockpits are actually really good for that. There's a lot of mods out there, so if you have a modded cockpit, that's one of the things you want to look for, is to make sure that it is providing you with the suit resources, the energy, as well as the gases that you need to replenish your suit. Most of the seats and cockpits that I've seen anyway do provide you with power, just by virtue of sitting in them, which is all fine and dandy. But also critical is, of course, that oxygen supply, so you can remain alive, and your hydrogen supply, so you can move around. All right, so let's go out of there now that we've demonstrated this. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to find ice, right? Ice. Pretty important thing. Now, those of you who saw this originally probably looked at it and said, hey, well, that looks a little bit silly. You have a 4x4 grid here, a 4 grid here, but you've got a box missing. Now, while I wanted to call this a basic survival thing, and we are going to go here, so not done just yet. Make sure I'm not running over time here. Once we are to the point where we have power, which we have accomplished, we have not quite accomplished the oxygen and hydrogen thing, but we will do that. What else is next? Hold that thought. Let's go find ourselves. Let's see what this one looks like. So we're going to zoom over here. We're going to consume a bit of hydrogen to get out to this thing. We are on the search for ice. That's what we're looking for. Usually these you're looking for asteroids that have met up and met with disaster here. So um, here you see one that looks like something ran into it, and usually those indicate they've been around for a little while. And I apologize for my graphic settings being a little lower than they might be otherwise. This is a Space Engineers something. Um, I run dual 1080 Ti's from NVIDIA, and there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't be able to run in the absolute highest power mode available, but Space Engineers crashes if I do. Alright, so one of the things that I apparently don't have is a drill. Tools. Oh, sorry, character tools. I do have a drill, but... Alright, so let's put our drill in number 9. So, as you can see, we have ice. How did I know that we had ice? Because most of these, where you see a asteroid that's been met with demise and impaled by something, have been around for a while, so they collect a little bit of ice. So let's grab some ice. Now I have some components in here, so I don't have an entire inventory capability here. But we do have quite a bit. Now one of the other mods that I run, because I find this is another immersion thing, is the automatic ore pickup. I highly recommend it. It will save you an awful lot of time and energy to consume all of these bits and pieces of ore as you're mining, and it will save you having to do it yourself. So I don't like to drill for half a second and spend the next 5 trying to pick up everything. I like to just be able to drill and continue on. Okay, so watch your inventory carefully, because let us go ahead and view our inventory and find out how much we have. 26 in stone. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the stone, because I really don't want that. We'll leave that there. And then we're going to pick up more hydrogen, or more ice, sorry. My phone in the background there. Alright, so I am full of inventory. Now I need to go back to where I was. So I've got a marker out here, which is actually marking the closer asteroid to where I was. Put my drill away. We have a little bit of stone, but let me go ahead and get rid of that stone. So I have 123k in ice, which is actually doing pretty good. So I'm using this as my marker. Otherwise I would be lost in space, no pun intended. So ultimately, I want to get back to our satellite. There's the satellite. I guess we could actually do this. We'll put it right into the gas generator. So let's see how much of this fits in there. Not very much. and then we'll put the rest into the container, and it will use it as it needs it. Okay, so we have, at least for the interim, solved our ice problem. So let's go ahead and retest on what we're doing here. So we used quite a bit of power to roam over there. So I'm going to touch T here. Just I want to see if this goes up. Okay, I'll just hold it. Okay, so one of the things you notice is that our oxygen and hydrogen went instantly to 100, and that's why I was touching very gingerly. So now we have the capability of restoring all of our suit resources, oxygen, hydrogen, and power, by going to the medical bay. You see this has switched over to the cyan or aqua, depending on what your color preference is for that name. And eventually it will turn off because there are no tanks here. So no tanks to do everything. So for sake of demonstration, let's go ahead and look at our power here, which didn't change, strangely enough. So that may be a false indicator, because if this is truly running, it should be consuming a whole lot of power. Let's do the same thing here. So you see we go to 100, 100, and 100, and we stay there. So the advantages of having, and all I did was climb into it. Alright, so one of the last things I want to do here before we get back into the other aspects here is see what is this actually consuming. So we're going to go ahead and touch on the control panel, press K, and maximum required input is 330 kilowatts, but it doesn't actually say if it's using that. Alright, the one last thing we wanted to do here was complete the antenna. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll pull out our welder, which is the number 7. And weld up our antenna. And once our antenna is 100%, what you see here is I'm part of Kinty Tiger Clan, which is the KTC, and you see it says antenna. Obviously that KTC is going to say something different for you, depending on what your world is. So let's go back into here. We're going to push a K to get to control panel. And so you see all of these different things are all the different blocks which are relative to this build. The only things that are not going to show up are armor, because armor is really not ownable. Armor is armor. And also conveyors. So conveyors, conveyor junctions, all that sort of thing is really not going to show up on this panel because it doesn't need to. It's not really an ownable block. It just does something. So one of the things, and this is OCD thing for me, is all 4 of my solar panels, I like the panels to be numbered, and then I create groups. And the reason I didn't do any of that here is to let you do this how you want. Now this may be something that in the initial stages of your survival, you'll build this and it will keep you alive. And then you're going to build a base or a ship of some kind, a vessel of some kind, and then ultimately you will use the parts from this. You'll dismantle this completely, use that for those particular parts or resources that you can use in your new vessel or base. And that's fine and dandy. When you tear it apart, the name is no longer relevant. So I left it completely alone. I left it DOCD'd. So my preference is always to create groups to declutter my control panel. I like everything very decluttered. Simple, right? So in this case, I don't need to address those on my toolbar, and I turn them off. So all I have to access this is that. So the downside to this, and in fact, let me turn those back on, is when you're referencing your solar panels, you can actually see how much its total output, how much it's capable of, which is to say the max output, and the current output. So right now we're a very small discrepancy. So I'm not absolutely perfectly aligned with the sun. I guessed, and I got pretty damn close, but remember, maximum output is 120 kilowatts, so I'm about a kilowatt and a third off. Oops. So you can see they're all putting out the same amount. Alright, so solar panels. And obviously you can't do that in a group, so here I select the group, and okay. So what's another advantage to groups? If group is, I've selected the group, you can see all the solar panels are highlighted. Now why is that? Well, that's because they're part of this group. So if you notice, I click on something else, come back to this group. The group, if you click on it, will always show the things that appear in the group, provided you don't have them hidden. So if you have the show block and terminal off, you'll notice all of my solar panels disappear. Why is that? Well, that's because they're in a group. So I turn them off. I no longer need to see them, but I see the group. I always see the group. You can name an antenna anything. So this is right now at 20 kilowatts consuming out to this 5 kilometers. So not too bad. But if we went all the way up to 50 kilometers, then we're going to go to 200. So let's, just for fun, this is a control left click, and let's change this to 10 kilometers, which should double my power output, which is fine. I do have that in reserve, which is great. Enable broadcasting. You always want to make sure you have your antennas set for enabled broadcasting. Why is that? Because all the information that you want it to send will only be sent if you do enable broadcasting. For example, what are some of the things that can broadcast? HUD. Okay, so let's experiment. Right now, I should have a HUD marker for my medical room, and here you see the medical room, which is about 8 meters away from me. We have a marker over there, which is that big asteroid there. We have our antenna, which is always going to show up. That's our beacon. So, medical room. And here's what we want to do. And I'm sorry about this flashing. This is just part of the Space Engineers graphics. No way to be gentle about it. Bullshit, okay? Space Engineers, Keen has done an awful lot. So those guys, great programmers and all that, but their graphic stuff suck. Their implementation of graphics absolutely sucks. There's no reason why a machine with dual 1080 Ti's running in SLI mode should crash. Okay? Absolutely no reason. It's the only game I play that crashes. Only game that crashes because of video. Graphics. Okay? Bullshit. Total bullshit. They need to fucking fix that. So, there's my rant. There's my rant for the moment. Okay, antenna. Turn off broadcasting. What happens? All my HUDs go away. So that medical room, which is still checked, that one goes away, that one goes away. Okay, so that's what that broadcasting does. So back into K, battery, antenna, broadcasting, medical room, HUD. Okay, have a look. There's our medical room again. Okay, turn the medical room off from the HUD. That should disappear, which it does. So now all we see is our antenna marker out to 10 kilometers. Alright, the only other thing that I would normally do here is take my 2 containers, and I like to designate them so I know which container I'm in. Obviously, both of these have the same name. Yes, they are both small cargo containers. Got that. But this is small container 1. Why is this 1? Because it was the first one that was built. And this one is 2 because it was the second one that was built. So, arbitrary, certainly, but there it is. And normally when I'm doing the total OCD thing, then I will do containers. Save. I don't need them on the toolbar. Obviously they are an inventory type device, so going to keep those and then turn them off. Hey, look at that. So got a few things prettied up here, so a few things out of my inventory that I don't really need at my control panel that I don't really need. All right. What are some of the other things that we need? Well, what's the purpose of Space Engineers as a game? Okay, survival is all fine and dandy. Now we're surviving in the world. Turn off that. But what's our purpose? So we're here, we're surviving, we have a source of power, we have a source of oxygen and hydrogen. Well, what's next? Building. Clearly building. What do we need to build? Well, obviously we have a lot of resources. We have, there's an asteroid, there's an asteroid. We went over here to that asteroid over yonder and found a bunch of stuff. There's an asteroid, there's an asteroid. There's a big asteroid. So lots and lots of raw materials that we can do something with, provided we have the ability to manipulate those materials into something that we can use. So I'm going to approach this a little bit backwards. What are the two things that we need? Now this is toolbars here. So I happen to have kind of my standard toolbar, which is 1 through 7 is what I set up as my standard toolbar. And then toolbar number 8 is whatever I'm working on right now. So I set all this up in advance before I started this video, just so I could have all these ready access. So 8 and 9, there is actually the assembler and the refinery. Why do we need an assembler and a refinery? Well, let's talk about that. An assembler is the mechanism that we take intermediate materials, so usable materials, and turn them into components. Okay, we need components to build things. That's the bottom line. We need components. How do we get components? Well, we have to be able to take these raw materials, these asteroids, which are not necessarily an infinite source of raw materials, because you only have a couple types of materials at each one of those. Assembler. And let's go ahead and do the refinery, and we're going to turn that sideways because I want to have this all connect in. So just like that. Bing. Okay, why did I do that? Because all of this is then interconnected. Okay, so we have, I'm going to go ahead and say it, infinite numbers of resources out here. Okay, so we have an asteroid, that's actually 2 asteroids over there. Asteroid, asteroid. We've got a bazillion asteroids. We've got asteroids everywhere. Why is this important? Because those are our raw materials. We need raw materials because ultimately we want to take those raw materials and turn them into something else. We can't build unless we have components. We can't get components unless we can take the refined materials and turn them into components. We can't get the refined materials until we get the raw materials. We can't get the raw materials and turn them into refined materials without a refinery. So, refinery, assembler are 2 very important pieces of equipment, which are in fact really number 3 and number 4. Now, whether you put the order as the refinery is number 3 and the assembler is number 4, or the assembler is number 3 and the refinery is number 4, really doesn't matter, because ultimately those 2 devices work hand in hand. Okay, we can't get raw materials to components without both of them. So they're both absolutely critical to the operation. So let's go ahead and pull out our welder again, and we'll weld up our assembler and our refinery. So what we have here is a refinery which can now take our raw materials, such as those materials from asteroids, turn them into refined materials, so raw to usable materials. Our assembler takes those usable refined materials and turns them into components. Okay, so with this assembly that we have right here, you have enough to survive. You can do everything you need to do with what you see right here in front of you. So, what have we accomplished over the course of this video? Again, I called this a basic tutorial, and I'm not really going to get into the assembly and the refining, mostly because I'm out of time for this hour-long period. But what we wanted to do was give yourself a source of energy, which we've done. Go ahead and turn this off. I'm going to jump into my cockpit here so I don't have to hold the key. Watch those go all the way up and watch my energy replenish there, and then jump out so we can see what we're looking at here again. So again, what have we accomplished? We've given ourselves a source of power, and our power really was those solar panels. Those are the raw power that we need, and then we turn that into usable power by way of a medical room, which replenishes our suit. So ultimately our energy use revolves around that suit. All of our hand tools, such as the grinder, the welder, and the drill, ultimately are powered from our suit power. So when we run out of suit power, those devices no longer function. So that medical room becomes a very important and integral part of survival because it allows us to replenish the resources, in this case energy, of our suit. We also need oxygen. We are oxygen breathing creatures. We need hydrogen because our suit thrusters are powered by hydrogen, so we need hydrogen to move around. We need oxygen to continue breathing. So our medical room also provides us with a mechanism of refilling those suit resources. But to do that, we have to do an oxygen generator or a gas generator. It used to be called an oxygen generator in the game, now called an H2O2 generator, which is very appropriate, a gas generator. We put ice into that gas generator, so that's our first resource. The neat thing about that is, yes, it is a raw material, but it's also used raw. So you do not have to have a refinery to be able to dump ice into an oxygen generator and have it be used. So it's just a raw material that you can use it raw, which is nice. So ice into the gas generator, which then becomes usable oxygen and hydrogen by way of power. So we're back to this power thing. You have to have power. Battery. Battery is important because it stores that excess energy. If I'm not using the energy, it can store it. If I do need it again, then I can draw from that storage, even if for whatever reason an asteroid, a meteor comes through and shatters one of my solar panels, so I no longer have the solar panel there. It's no longer producing energy, so I can draw that energy that was stored from my battery, which is always a good thing. And ultimately, while it's a little bit hard to see because I put a conveyor in front of it, storage containers. Again, while not absolutely critical, let's turn the lights on, while not absolutely critical to the survival, you're going to have a lot more materials and components than you can carry. So we have cargo containers. Cargo containers store materials. Pretty straightforward. There's a bunch of different sizes. For small grids, you have small, medium, and large containers. And for large grids and stations, you have a small container, which is what you're seeing two in front of you, of the small containers, to the large containers, all of which have a variety of port configurations, usually 6 for the large stuff, and variable for the small stuff, the small grid stuff. So containers. I'm going to do it in order of use. So we get our materials from the asteroids, which you're going to find plenty of them out in your world, provided your world has asteroids. If it doesn't, I pity you. We need those raw materials. So raw materials, we take those raw materials, we put them into a refinery. We take those raw materials, the refinery changes them into usable materials. Our assembler, which is this box right here, takes those usable materials and turns them into the components we need. Why do we need components? Because everything we build takes components. So we need some way of taking those raw materials ultimately into components, and then the components allow us to build the blocks that we need. So there you go, your basic tutorial survival, your basic survival tutorial. Switch my words around there. Which should be everything you need to get started playing Space Engineers. So this is Kenty signing off, and we will see you next time.